The year is 2050 in the film. An environmental disaster has completely destroyed the world. A survivor named Nova searches the barren environment and discovers a bird skeleton before being called back to base because of low oxygen levels. Back at base, she tells Simon, an old man in a wheelchair, that they must travel back in the past.
Sorry for the small pause. It took a lot of hard work to find the movies, make the script, and edit them. Little request, please show your support.
Add, Nova's robot friend, along with Nova, gets ready to leave right away. After preparing, Nova launches her spacecraft into a wormhole that takes her to the past, leaving the dust-filled, orange-tinted Earth behind. Nova consequently crashes into an unusual, completely dark forest. In 2025, evening falls, a young child named Nas is seen riding a quad bike through a forest. When Ad notices him, he quickly asks for help in getting the unconscious Nova off the crash site before anyone else sees. Even though they quickly leave, some police officers see Nas while escaping. Nas takes them to an abandoned factory, where Nova looks younger even though she is still unconscious. Detective Clara, in the meantime, questions the officers about the crash and the people they saw escaping. As a result, Clara goes to the closest house, which is owned by Nazis, and finds that Nas is not there. While Nas goes back to the factory to find Nova awake, he suggests she check the old factory. Nova is taken aback when Clara shows up at the factory. When her car disappears in a screeching departure, she spots Nova's abandoned spacesuit. The following day, Clara takes a quad bike from Nas to a military base. She provides the military with their crashed spaceship findings. The fingerprints of the pilot have led them to a curious discovery, a young child named Nova. While traveling Nova, who is only 12 years old in this timeline, Nova asks Nas what it intends to do with the funds. He talks about his desire to see his father again in South America. Their car suddenly drops and starts to release smoke. Alon, an elderly driver, stops and offers to assist them at his house. They meet his wife Marion because they can't do roadside repairs at his house. Nova announces that Marion has dinner ready after the car has been fixed. Moran observes Naz's absent driver's license and Nova's peculiar attire. Naz is identified as a kidnapper in a news report, but the couple decides to help them rather than calling for police. When a police car arrives, Naz is informed by Nova, and they sneak away into the cornfields while Alton conceals the pilfered police vehicle in his garage. Suddenly, the stolen vehicle pulls back into the police vision. Clara asks questions about the current day. Clara is perplexed by Nova's parents' insistence that she was studying the night before. Upon examining Nova's room and discovering nothing unusual, she brings the family in for additional interrogation. Clara receives word from a scientist that Nova's fingerprints were discovered on the spaceship, raising the possibility of cloning. The news that Clara's car has been found reaches her. Clara heads straight to Alton's house with her team. When Clara gets there, she questions the couple about the stolen vehicle. An officer quickly reveals Alton's lie by bringing out Nas's clothing. This triggers a comprehensive search for Nova and Nas. Future Nova and Nas, meanwhile, have arrived at the forest. As soon as Nova notices a soldier, she automatically points her futuristic weapon at him, greatly slowing him down. They eventually reach a heavily guarded mansion in an attempt to avoid police. They hear a meeting discussing plans for drilling near the North Pole as they slip inside through a vent. Nas is told by Nova to remain still while she addresses the meeting participants. Among them, she spots a younger Simon, and when Simon insists she share her message publicly, she asks to speak with him privately. Because drilling there carries the risk of releasing massive amounts of methane, Nova warns against it. The older man, who is Simon's father, ignores her warning because he thinks there isn't much of a risk. Consequently, security escorts Nova and Nas outside. Nova sees Simon receiving criticism from his father for permitting kids to disrupt the event. Meanwhile, Claire is still taken aback by the soldiers' slowness. Later, she receives a call from a security guard at the mansion alerting her to the escapees' presence. Nova and NS make their way to the ocean. At this point, Nova tells NS that she is a 37-year-old future woman who traveled back in time to the mansion and became young again. After seeing that they had concealed something behind Simon's car in the surveillance footage of the two escapes, Claire calls the scientist right away to find out if the current Nova is still being held captive. This is confirmed by the scientist, who also says that young Simon is being protected by two Novas. After obtaining Ada Future, The two escapees eventually make it to Simon's house. After Claire sends a SWAT team to the billionaire's house, Simon is meditating in the living room when Nova and Nas break into the house. Simon's future self left a holographic message for them to add to the project, and Nova reveals their future acquaintance. Surrounding the house quietly, the SWAT team watches the recording with young Simon. Simon sees the message, but he's still not convinced. He thinks it's a ruse to blackmail him right before he calls the cops. When Nas grabs Nova's gun and points it at Simon, the SWAT team and CLA break into the house. CLA hears gunfire. She quickly assesses Nova's condition after discovering her on the ground. Ad seems to have blocked a shot intended for Nova, and the robot was destroyed. Nas finds the Nova incident terrifying. He makes a quick run and arrives at Alton's house, where he tells the elderly man that Nova has been caught by police. Nas bursts into tears. Alton hugs him. After, a few future Nova wakes up in a hospital ward with CLA by her side and consoles her. Then, when Nova confides in Claire about her future mission to stop Simon's catastrophic plan, Claire asks if there is anything that Nova can do to help. This prompts Claire to hurry to the base to ask the scientist if time travel is theoretically possible. He replies that it is possible, and he is fixing the robot. Despite the efforts of CLA and the scientist to capture the robot, it comes to life and steals the futuristic gun. Young Simon is then spotted by CLA on the property, and she tells him that the evidence they have gathered backs up Nova's claim to be from the future. Simon's father steps in before he can respond, which makes Simon write off Nova's worries as a result of his fixation with climate change. Nas runs outside as soon as he notices Ad flying towards him. After running out of energy, the robot crumbles in its wake. Nova is in an army base and desperately needs assistance. Ad inform Nas. With determination, Nas picks the futuristic gun, and Alton drives him to the checkpoint, where Nova is being imprisoned. Nas is captured and questioned right away. The colonel tries to talk to Nas about his intentions in the interrogation room, but Nas stops them both in their tracks by pulling out a gun and shooting the colonel and another soldier. Then he runs to the area where the scientist is working with Nova's spacesuit. Without hurting the scientist, Nas takes the spacesuit. He finds Nova and helps her in, wearing the spacesuit. Nas tries to carry her away after lifting her up. Nas carried her inside the spacecraft within the army base. Before stepping outside the spaceship, Nova thanks Nas for saving her life. Nas reluctantly says goodbye to her. He watches the spacecraft as it takes off into the night. When CLA sees him, he questioned him for what he did, but Nas doesn't say anything, keeping his eyes on the spacecraft that is taking off. Travels back in time, but after Nova's mission fails, the planet remains desolate even after her spaceship is found. Nova is quickly transferred to a tiny tent to relax. The young girl Nova transforms back into her adult form after taking a nap. She exits the tent to speak with Simon in the future. The elderly Simon apologizes and tells her that things could have changed.
A child appears and addresses Nova as his mother. Nas later reveals himself as the child's father. They went out and her child found a skeleton of a bird, made her realize how the world became a deadly wasteland and how important it is to change the past for future generations. She decides to go on another journey to the past. She also intends to stop young Simon anyhow. Nova goes back to where she left Nas. As a result, Nova finds Nas and Clara and asks them if they missed her, despite the fact that they were only apart for a minute. Nas and Nova then depart for the North Pole. When they arrived at the North Pole, they changed into their all-white attire and hurried to the location where Simon and his father were giving a speech to a crowd. Because of Nova's influence, Simon expresses doubts about moving through with the plan, but his father is determined to drill the North Pole. Nova warned the audience not to proceed with the disastrous plan, but they saw that the two children had used their guns to slow down the guards. This caused the audience to scatter. Simon's father continues to try to start the drilling machine, but fortunately Nova reacts quickly and shoots the stubborn old man and the drill mechanism to stop it. Simon regrets not having trusted Nova and sobs repeatedly. When Nova and Nas notice his change of heart, they leave later. After dropping Nas off at Alton's house, Nova gives him a hug and a handshake. Nas asks whether Nova thinks they'll meet again in the future, and Nova gives an unspecified answer. Then Alton comes with an unexpected gift, that he has fixed her robot. At last, Nova enters her spaceship and heads back to the future. Nas and the elder couple say goodbye to Nova. Nas is now friendly with the couple, walks freely into the spare room when he notices a detective's car pulling up. Subsequently, Clara asks Nas if all of the spaceships that are popping up everywhere are from the future. Nas says that they are, and says they will visit again if necessary. He also tells her that Nova has come back to her timeline permanently. Clara is happy with Nas's answers. Clara releases him and returns his quad bike. As he starts, Nas notices a car with young Nova in the back seat, and he knows they will eventually get back together. Happy Nas follows the car owned by Nova.
I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video.